Hello there. So in this video I'm going to be talking about William Shakespeare's Sonnet 130, one of the Dark Lady sonnets. This video commentary is aimed mainly at those doing the IOC for IB Diploma English A, but it's hopefully useful for anybody else who just wants to know about this particularly strange sonnet. It's certainly one of my favourite sonnets. It at first appearance appears to basically decry everything about the Dark Lady physically, and when comparing her with things in nature, but ultimately moves to some kind of compliment. We're saying that she's actually better than all of the things he's compared her with. The bigger issue, that's a kind of summary of the sonnet that you could begin with. The bigger issue here is that he's also having a bit of a dig or a criticism of other contemporary poets of his time who tended to use a far more hyperbolic, overblown, Petrarchan style to describe love. So it was almost like an illness and something that was very, very over the top. And so Shakespeare here is attempting to use much more plain, regular comparisons to show that actually his lady is still as wonderful to him, with just regular comparisons. So I'm going to break this sonnet up into the normal kind of 3 quatrains and the couplet. You can see on the right hand side I've got little headlines. So if I was doing the IOC, these are kind of little triggers that would help me introduce each particular section as I move along to show the development of the sonnet, and also to give me some things to focus on in each particular section or chunk. Okay, so let's begin our commentary then in the opening stanza. Shakespeare seems to have posed a question, but we don't actually see that. Shall I compare thee to things in nature? He doesn't bother asking that question. He launches straight into this list of comparisons, fairly standard, typical things that a sonnet of the time would have compared. In fact, there are genuine sonnets that are very similar to this that aren't so much of a parody. His mistress' eyes are nothing like the sun. Nobody's eyes are. Coral at the time, that was found in Shakespeare's period would have generally been red, so that's kind of taken as standard. Her lips are nowhere near as red as coral, which again is not really surprising. If snow be white, why then her breasts are dun. Dun is a kind of a brownish, mousy type of colour. The dun cow was a popular a phrase at the time, so he's also partly comparing it to a cow. It's not particularly complimentary. And if hairs be wires, black wires grow on her head. The wires here are more things connected with jewellery, as the fact they're black is the more sort of shocking or less complimentary part. And so we see sun, coral, snow, and hair here. These comparisons, all to do with very powerful, colourful images of nature, and very strong contrasting images. And we're tempted to think, well, actually nobody's eyes and hair is really like this. It's not realistic. So although it's not particularly complimentary, we can see from the beginning Shakespeare's trying to show us that he's injecting some realism here. So we move on beyond the physical features now. We continue with that a little bit, and then we move in this quatrain into the sense of smell, olfactory imagery. Roses damask. Damask is a type of pink. There's 3 main colours of roses at the time. He's seen these roses, however, no such roses do I see in her cheeks. This is developing the idea here. Previously, everything was covered in one line. Here it develops into 2. I've seen this, but I haven't seen this in her, in the second line. And again, I don't see roses in her cheeks. Nobody's cheeks have that particular colour tone usually. And then we move on. There's a visual thing with roses, but obviously there's also an olfactory, a smell, and so there's a nice segue into the idea of perfume as well. In some perfumes there is more delight than in the breath from my mistress reeks. Again, perfume and smelling perfect was a traditional kind of motif, if you like, of Petrarchan-style sonnets. Here Shakespeare again is being much more realistic, saying my mistress' breath reeks. That's not. Reeks isn't quite as strong a word as it's stronger today than it would have been in Shakespeare's time. It's more connected with kind of sweaty, and it's certainly not a compliment, however. I don't think she would have been too impressed by this. And so we see him moving through, developing the idea in terms of line length, and also in terms of the various senses that he's discussing here. So moving on to the third quatrain, he continues this idea, but again, 2 lines to discuss one particular image. We move on to sound here. I love to hear her speak, yet while I know that music have a far more pleasing sound. So where initially sounds like music is better than her, which again is her voice, which again is not surprising. However, finally here we get to see something of a compliment. Shakespeare or the speaker suggests here that actually her voice, he prefers the voice, he loves to hear her speak, even though he acknowledges that music is better to listen to. There's a sense that he prefers her voice and the sound of her voice. So finally we get around to an actual compliment of sorts. And then he sums up this idea with comparing it with the goddess, which again is making it much more idealistic as opposed to realistic. I never saw a goddess go. I'm tempted to answer here, well, neither did anybody else. None of the other poets did. My mistress, when she walks, treads on the ground, really brings us down to earth in every sense, as we see her walking physically, her trait as she walks. So a different kind of sense here, a movement. And again, the idea that he's just being realistic. He isn't necessarily being mean, although it does give that impression. He's just trying to be realistic. And then we move on to the quatrain, and finally, I guess here you could say the voltar or the turn or the twist appears, and yet, however, by heaven, by God, I think my love as rare as any she belied with false compare. This is interesting. My love rare here has the sense of precious stones or something rare having great value, not just unusual. So his love is particularly special to him because of all the things he's mentioned. The him, she's realistic. Any belied with false compare, belied is linked to lied, and false compare is obviously similar. So here Shakespeare seems to be more directly criticizing those other sonneteers or poets who would say their love was a goddess on earth and smelled like the best perfume and looked like coral lips and all those cliches. He's kind of fairly directly criticizing and mocking here. And we're left with the sense that he is paying the Dark Lady a compliment. Whether it's a true compliment is debatable. I'm not sure whether too many would be flattered by the comparisons here. Earlier on, there was a mention of breasts being done as well. It doesn't necessarily mean that she was dark-skinned. She's simply not white as snow. And something some people refer to as a couplet tie, where a word from earlier in the quatrains is used in the actual couplet to tie things together and get some unity. I, as in Sonnet 18 here, I seems to be the couplet tie because it is all about visual imagery to start with. I, E-Y-E, and ultimately it comes back down to I, as in the speaker's opinion of what is real beauty. Okay, so that's my commentary. I then probably want to give myself a little bit of time to talk about the form and structure. Here it's pretty standard. There isn't too much going on that is unusual. A regular 3 quatrains and a couplet gives you the 14 lines. There's an alternating rhyme scheme all the way along. The heroic couplet is simply the repeated rhyme in the last 2 lines. The volta arrives in the couplet a little bit later than normal. Usually it's in the start of the third quatrain. The rhythm is worth mentioning. The way the lines are delivered, it sounds as though the first part, when he talks about beauty, is quite natural, and then the second part, but my mistress doesn't do this, is much more jarring and sudden. But it does all flow together very nicely. So it's quite a clever way of producing that effect. Keep an eye on the clock if you're doing it IOC. So around about now, you want to be summing up what you've shown, what you've seen. So go back to the theme. This is really it's a love poem about realism rather than idealism. It's also maybe a quite passionate dig at the other sonneteers of the time who were much more idealistic and hyperbolic. He attempts to praise his Dark Lady with far more realistic imagery. Whether he actually succeeds in doing that is perhaps still up for debate. Okay, so thank you very much.